In the previous episode, How to Stop Doom Scrolling, we talked a little bit about how to respond when lies and misinformation proliferate. We will deal with that more at a later date because it's an important issue. But we need to talk about a more fundamental problem, a problem that sits just outside of our awareness, lurking there beyond our vision. A problem that we're not addressing as a society, but a problem that warps and distorts our politics and our lives. The question is this: what do we do when the truth itself is toxic? What do we do when reality is so horrible that to fully take it in, to really acknowledge what is happening, would make us feel so overwhelmed that we would simply shut down? The other day, I was reading a New York Times article called "How Close Are the Planet's Climate Tipping Points?" It tracks several vital systems to life on the planet and how close we were to them breaking down. The mass death of coral reefs, the abrupt thawing of permafrost, the collapse of the Greenland ice, the loss of the Amazon rainforest, the shutdown of the Atlantic currents. With some of them, we have a little more time than with others. But for some, we are precariously close to them shutting down. Unless profound change happens, it is likely that all of these systems will collapse over the next 10 to 75 years. As I read this article, I noticed in me a certain emotional distance. I was keeping this knowledge at arm's length. But if I sit with it, if I let myself focus on just one of these systems and their potential collapse, let's say the mass death of the coral reefs, if I imagine all of those forms of life dying out, just going dark, the loss is horrific, but I can feel this wall keeping me from fully feeling the impact of what that would mean. If I let myself think about the melting of the Greenland ice and the sea level rise that would ensue, and all the people living in those islands, and all the people in those coastal towns and cities and villages, the impact on countless human lives, the death, the disruption, the trauma. If I let myself take that in, it's hard to breathe. It's hard to think. My brain just sort of freezes and locks up. I become paralyzed. These scientific truths make me unable to function. This is a toxic effect. I have the same experience when I read about or see images or video covering political situations where there are organized killings of innocent people on a massive scale, or when there's a humanitarian crisis where thousands of people are dying. My soul screams out. My brain just wants to shut down. Taking in this information challenges and disrupts some of my fundamental beliefs about goodness in the world. Okay, let's take a couple deep breaths. In from the belly and out through the mouth. A long exhale. In through the nose and out through the mouth. Okay, we've invoked the horror. We all know what we're talking about, the problems that we're dealing with. My favorite philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, in his later work, and one of my favorites, Beyond Good and Evil, talks about this directly. He says, something might be true while being harmful and dangerous in the highest degree. Indeed, it might be a basic characteristic of existence that those who would know it completely would perish. In which case, the strength of a spirit should be measured according to how much truth one could endure, or to put it more clearly, to what degree one would require it to be thinned down, shrouded, sweetened, blunted, falsified. When I first read these words as a teenager, they seemed distant. A truth that was so horrible it was unthinkable was something that existed in the historical past. I thought about the horror of the Holocaust, or the atomic bombs that the U.S. dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But I lived safe in the belief that we had learned from history. While I marched for nuclear disarmament and I stood with others against white nationalism, I felt fairly secure that our future would be less horrific than our past. But based on what is currently happening politically and ecologically, I can no longer make myself believe that. The future feels like it will be profoundly worse than the present. So the question is, how do we cope when the truth of our situation, the truth of what is happening in the world, is so overwhelming that it threatens our ability to function? Today, we will begin to address this question. We will talk about 3 different ways to approach unthinkable horror. This episode is called The Moth, the Ostrich, and the Gorgon. You're listening to Resilience in Dark Times, I'm your companion and guide, Michael Glavin. Whatever brought you here, I'm glad you found us. This is a space for honest conversation, practical strategies, and the kind of hope that comes from facing reality together. Let's dive in. Before we start, I wanted to express appreciation to all of you for your support and encouragement. This is the first episode that I've recorded since I first launched the podcast, and wow, the warm reception has meant so much to me. A lot of you have reached out to me personally to express how this podcast has helped you. Others of you have gotten onto Substack and gotten a paid subscription, which is really helpful in defraying some of the costs of doing this important work. Others of you have shared this podcast with friends, so I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate you. There are three basic ways to respond when the truth is toxic. I refer to them as the Moth, the Ostrich, and the Gorgon. First off, let me say that I love curiosity. The quest for knowledge, the drive to know for the sake of knowing, that's a wonderful thing. But like most things, a strength can also become a weakness. We're all familiar with the expression like a moth to a flame. It's the idea that a moth is drawn to the light, so they fly directly into a candle's flame or into a bonfire or a porch light. And we've all seen this happen. Moths repeatedly flying into a street light or porch light. PSA for moths: to reduce this effect, turn off your porch light if it's not needed, or use a yellow LED bug light to lessen this effect and help out our furry little moth friends. Back to regularly scheduled programming. The idea is that moths are compelled to fly towards the light. We talked about this in our last episode, How to Stop Doom Scrolling. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, check it out. When you're doom scrolling, we feel compelled to continue to doom scroll. We talked about how dopamine plays a role in this process, and we talked about the psychological feeling that there is something very important to be discovered which keeps us scrolling. But we also talked about the detrimental physiological and psychological effects of compulsively seeking out negative news. But I think it's important to take a deeper look at that compulsion to seek out something even when it's self-destructive. I think no author captures the self-destructive drive to knowledge better than H.P. Lovecraft. At some point, I want to do an episode where I put forth a critique of the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. The central characters epitomize the white, autonomous male ego of the European Enlightenment and the attraction to and fear of the other here defined as nature, the feminine, people of color, immigrants, etc. This construction of maleness and whiteness and the fear of immigrants, people of color, women, etc. is central to what is happening now in the MAGA movement, but that's for another day. If this sounds interesting to you, just let me know and I will do it sooner rather than later. For our purposes, though, Lovecraft perfectly captures the self-destructive drive to know, that curiosity which propels someone towards their own destruction. One example of this is his short story, The Haunter of the Dark. The story starts with the ending. The body of the main character, Blake, is found in an abandoned church. He has died under mysterious circumstances, probably killed by a strike of lightning because his body is charred. The story then is a flashback and recounting of his final days and how he came to his untimely end. Blake was an artist. He was renting a room that had a window which looked out across the town. Blake was doing his best work, painting strange alien landscapes. From his window, he would look out over the rooftops and see a spire of an abandoned church. He often speculated about that tower. One late afternoon, he went to investigate. He talked to some local people, all of whom shunned the place, but he decided to break into the old church anyway and investigate. Once inside, he found a bunch of old books, ancient tomes like the Necronomicon, and in a room at the base of the spire, he found this. As Blake grew accustomed to the feeble light, he noticed odd bas-reliefs on the strange open box of yellowish metal. Approaching, he tried to clear the dust away with his hands and a handkerchief, and saw that the figures were of a monstrous and utterly alien kind, depicting entities which, though seemingly alive, resembled no known life form ever evolved on this planet. The 4-inch seeming sphere turned out to be a nearly black, red striated polyhedron with many irregular flat surfaces. Either a very remarkable crystal of some sort or an artificial object of carved and highly polished mineral matter. It did not touch the bottom of the box, but was held suspended by means of a metal band around its center, with 7 queerly designed supports extending horizontally to angles of the box's inner wall near the top. This stone, once exposed, exerted upon Blake an almost alarming fascination. He could scarcely tear his eyes from it, and as he looked at its glistening surfaces, he almost fancied it was transparent, with half-formed worlds of wonder within. Into his mind floated pictures of alien orbs with great stone towers, other orbs with Titan mountains and no mark of life, and still remoter spaces where only a stirring and vague blackness told of the presence of consciousness and will. When he did look away, it was to notice a somewhat singular mound of dust in the far corner near the ladder to the steeple. Just why it took his attention he could not tell, but something in its contours carried a message to his unconscious mind. Plowing toward it and brushing aside the hanging cobwebs as he went, he began to discern something grim about it. Hand and handkerchief soon revealed the truth, and Blake gasped with a baffling mixture of emotions. It was a human skeleton, and it must have been there for a very long time. The skull was in a very peculiar state, stained yellow and with a charred aperture in the top, as if some powerful acid had eaten through the solid bone. What had happened to the skeleton during its 4 decades of silent entombment here, Blake could not imagine. Before he realized it, he was looking at the stone again and letting its curious influence call up a nebulous pageantry in his mind. He saw processions of robed, hooded figures whose outlines were not human, and looked on endless leagues of desert lined with carved, sky-reaching monoliths. He saw towers and walls in nighted depths under the sea, and vortices of space where wisps of black mist floated before thin shimmerings of cold purple haze. And beyond all else, he glimpsed an infinite gulf of darkness, where solid and semi-solid forms were known only by their windy stirrings, and cloudy patterns of force seemed to superimpose order on chaos, and hold forth a key to all the paradoxes and arcana of the worlds we know. Then all at once the spell was broken by an access of gnawing and indeterminate panic fear. Blake choked and turned away from the stone, conscious of some formless alien presence close to him and watching him with horrible intentedness. He felt entangled with something which was not in the stone, but which had looked through it at him, something which would ceaselessly follow him with a cognition that was not physical sight. Plainly, the place was getting on his nerves, as well it might in view of his gruesome find. The light was waning too, and since he had no illuminant with him, he knew he would be leaving soon. The story goes on from there, but that's the central passage that captures what is happening to us. This passage captures the dynamic in which we find ourselves when we're acquiring knowledge that on some level is harming us emotionally. We have the feeling, like the main character Blake, that somehow we will find, quote, the key to all the paradoxes and arcana of the worlds we know. I mean, how awesome would that be, right? If we could find that, that'd be great. Yet at the same time, we can see the foreshadowing, our future self, charred, burnt dust. And when we look too long into the crystal, i.e. our phone, something comes alive. Something becomes entangled with us. And that something remains even when we put away the crystal, even when we put away our phone. What we invoked, what we conjured forth, what we awakened stalks us. Yes, this is just a story. This is just a metaphor, but the dynamic is very real. After reading that New York Times article about the various ecological collapses, I can't shake the images of a disastrous future. They warp and distort my sense of well-being, affecting me long after I finish that article and put down my phone. This lurking sense of dread there off in the distance. Studies show that scientists researching climate change or reporters covering climate change or reporters covering natural disasters or war zones are all at higher risk for PTSD, anxiety, and depression. But you don't even have to be a first-hand witness to experience trauma. There's something called vicarious trauma. Depending on what you're watching, graphic content can cause secondary stress disorder. Witnessing trauma happening to other people can cause us trauma. This applies to many political situations, wars, terrorist attacks, police violence, or individual acts of violence as well, and watching videos of natural disasters. Exposure to these horrible truths can cause anxiety or eco-anxiety, depression, or PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder as well. To be clear, I'm not saying to not be informed. All things being equal, curiosity is a good thing. Acquiring knowledge is a good thing. But I'm trying to let you know the risks involved when consuming harsh scientific truth or horrifying political truth. If you notice this tendency in yourself to know everything that's going on, ask yourself the question we asked ourselves from the last podcast. As you're consuming the research or reading the news or watching the video of the atrocities, ask yourself, is this helping me right now? If it is, okay. If not, then stop. Go for a walk, pet a friendly dog, make yourself some tea. When I stop, I go outside in my garden and I look at the native flowers and I watch the various bees going about their business. This gets me out of my head and reconnects me with the world around me in the here and now. But if you notice any symptoms of anxiety, depression, or PTSD, please reach out to a licensed therapist and get some help. There's no shame in getting help. That's a sign of resilience and strength, is to know when you need help and to ask for it. Don't be a moth to the flame. Don't be like Blake. Don't ignore the warning signs. Don't continue down a path of self-destruction. We need you, and we need you at your best, not with a half-right nervous system. Taking in too much negative information can be debilitating. It can lead to overwhelm, shutdown, and burnout. It can also lead you to the next strategy we're going to talk about, the ostrich. We've all heard the term burying your head in the sand. It means that you're avoiding facing your problems. The expression comes from the notion that ostriches hide their heads in the sand when threatened. Where did this idea come from? Well, it goes back over 2,000 years to a Roman naturalist named Pliny the Elder. He wrote a series of books called The Natural History, and in book 10, he writes of ostriches that they have the marvelous property of being able to digest every substance without distinction. But their stupidity is no less remarkable, for although the rest of their body is so large, they imagine when they thrust their head and neck into a bush that the whole of the body is concealed. It's like when my two boys are small. If you have kids, I know you went through this phase, they would cover their eyes and they would think that I couldn't see them. It's super cute and super ridiculous. The thinking is, if I can't see you, then you can't see me. If I don't see a threat, then I'm safe from the threat. Ridiculous or not, this is a primary psychological defense. If I don't acknowledge the reality of something, I can't be hurt by it. The brilliant film Don't Look Up perfectly captures this strategy. The psychological strategy is called denial. Sigmund Freud first talked about denial, which he called negation, but it was more fleshed out by his daughter, Anna Freud. In her work, The Ego and the Mechanisms of Defense, she writes, the ego resorts to denial in order to not become aware of some painful impression from without. That's it in a nutshell. It's like when your friend is in a good mood and you try to tell them some unpleasant news. And they cover up their ears and start saying, la, 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 I can't hear you. In this case, that would be a conscious denial of information or facts. But denial of fact can also happen subconsciously in some traumatic situations. There's also denial of responsibility, which we won't go into here, and denial of emotional impact, where someone can admit that a negative event is happening, but they don't let themselves feel the emotional impact. Or they can intellectually minimize the event in order to not feel the full weight of their negative emotions. Denial is not necessarily good or bad. is a protection from overwhelming emotion in order to maintain a functioning ego, a functioning self in the world. We need a functioning ego. Our psychological defenses are meant to help us. Let me give you an example. So my wife calls me her delicate flower. And as you might have guessed, I'm a pretty sensitive person. My empathy is way kind of off the charts, so that if I see someone I care about, even someone I don't know, getting injured, I feel physical pain. It's like this jolt of lightning through the center of my body. Like I can't watch medical stuff on TV. It's just way too intense for me. My own stuff I'm okay with, but it's weird. It's other people's in pain is hard for me to deal with. That sets the scene. So when my kids were in grade school, I was my wife was out with the kids and they were coming home. The kids had already eaten. I think they were at some party or something. So it was going to be my wife and I was cooking for the two of us. I made this really great pasta dish, pasta primavera with this garlic butter sauce. And I was so excited. And they came home, and so I was plating the pasta. And the kids came running in. It was really loud. And my wife needed to go to the bathroom. So she was going to the bathroom, and they were being rambunctious kids. And I hear a door slam, and I hear a scream, and it's a curdling scream, and my wife was really upset, and my oldest son was crying, and so I was like, went over there and I said, what happened? And so my wife said that she was closing the door as she was going to the bathroom, and my son had put his thumb into the door jamb as he was running by, and the door just closed on it. So I took a deep breath, and my first thought was, this is not happening. That's the denial that it's just not happening. I said, okay, show me your thumb. And he showed it to me, and I will not go into great detail, but it was a big mess. And so I just pushed down I just went into denial. I did not allow myself to feel the emotion that was there in witnessing what I saw with my precious son and his thumb. And I just very calmly, I just said, okay, we're going to go to the emergency room. We're going to put some ice on it. It's going to be okay. I got him, put some ice on it, wrapped it up, went to the emergency room, got it taken care of. He had to have surgery, and it was, he's totally fine now. Everything's okay. But that's an example of denial, right? I denied the emotional impact. I just would not allow myself to feel the full impact of what was happening, and just went into logistical mode, just purely rational. Let's take care of this. And that's a strength, right? If I had let myself just freak out to see the impact of what happened to it would be hard to cope in that situation. So I think that's a good example of denial of the emotional impact while admitting the fact helped me manage the situation and take care of my son. Another example is when each of my parents died. I remember the sort of the layers of denial peeling away. I would go through this emotional grieving. I would come to some peace, some level of acceptance. And I would rest and I'd feel okay. I'd think, okay, that wasn't so bad. I've come to acceptance, right? Like I've adjusted to this, but it'd be, a day in or 2 days in or a week in, right? But then after that moment of stillness, then the grieving would start again at a deeper level. So I observed that my mind was letting me come to terms with what had happened in stages. It was sort of beautiful, compassionate, that my mind didn't make me process all of this all at once. I came through layers of grieving, acceptance, another round of a deeper round of grieving and acceptance. So I hope that makes sense. That denial, it can be a really helpful self-protective thing to allow us to cope and to give us time to adjust to something that's really hard to adjust to. But denial can also be harmful. For example, sometimes people are in denial of their symptoms because they're afraid of what the symptoms might mean, which causes them to avoid seeking out a doctor, which makes their prognosis worse when they eventually go see a doctor and get a diagnosis. In situations where action is necessary, denial can be deadly. Every smoker is in denial. You have to be. I was when I was a smoker. Intellectually, I knew smoking caused cancer. I knew smoking would eventually take years off of my life. But I didn't allow that knowledge to impact me emotionally. Two things helped me quit. The first one I talked about last episode, when I realized that each cigarette was actually prolonging my misery and pushing me further away from feeling normal. But the other thing that helped me quit was being with this totally cute, awesome person who I wanted to marry and have kids with. That distant future where I would have to deal with the health consequences of smoking was suddenly tangible. I could see us as a family, and I wanted to be a part of that family in a healthy way for as long as possible. Given our current political and ecological situation, what do you think? Is denial helpful or destructive? In terms of global warming, we need to take action. Everything we do now will directly improve or worsen our collective future. But is shouting the horrible truth even louder the solution? I hope you see that scare tactics can deepen denial. I hope this perspective helps you feel some empathy for those in denial. If someone is in denial about climate change, somewhere in them, they may have made an assessment that they are not emotionally strong enough to admit the truth. Telling them how bad it really is and how much worse it's going to get is not going to help them move towards acceptance of this truth. We need to know what is happening in order to take action. But what is happening is so terrible, it's hard to take in without feeling so overwhelmed, so upset that we give in to despair. How can we confront a truth that is so terrible that it threatens our ability to cope? When I was first considering the problem of unthinkable horror, how can you confront a truth that is so overwhelming that it causes paralysis? I remembered a Greek myth that I thought might help. There once was a king, Polydectes, who desired a woman named Danae, but she had a protective son named Perseus, whose father was Zeus. So you don't want to mess with Perseus. Polydectes couldn't kill him outright because of his father and because it would probably nix his amorous advances on his mom. So he came up with a dastardly plan. Instead, the king decided to send Perseus on a quest that would result in certain death. King Polydectes ordered Perseus to bring him the head of Medusa. Medusa was born a beautiful mortal woman with flowing hair. Poseidon had impregnated her while in the temple of Athena, and for that Athena cursed the mortal Medusa, giving her snakes for hair, and made it so that anyone who made eye contact with her would be turned to stone. The gods decided to help Perseus in his quest to find and behead Medusa. Hades, the god of the underworld, gave Perseus a cap of invisibility. Hermes, the messenger of the gods, gave Perseus a pair of winged sandals. Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare, gave Perseus a reflective bronze shield. And Hephaestus, god of fire and the forge, gave Perseus a sword. Perseus was able to seek out and find the cave of the Gorgons. There's 3 of them. The cave was filled with statues. All the poor souls would happen to gaze directly at Medusa and were turned to stone. Perseus was lucky. The Gorgons were asleep when he arrived. He knew that if he looked directly at Medusa, he would be petrified. This seemed like an impossible task. How could he behead this Gorgon without looking at her? But then it came to him. He took the shiny bronze shield that he got from Athena, and he held it so that he could guide himself to Medusa by looking at the reflection in the shield. He crept closer and closer until he saw her there, with the snakes hissing and snapping at him, striking out. He used the sword from Hephaestus and beheaded the monster. As Medusa was beheaded, drops of blood hit the soil, and the winged horse Pegasus and the giant Chrysaor sprang forth. They were the offspring of Medusa and Poseidon. Perseus threw Medusa's head into a satchel, put on Hades' cap of invisibility, and flew away using Hermes' winged sandals. As an aside, the head of Medusa was later mounted on Athena's shield. That's pretty badass. Okay, so do you see it? Do you see why I'm so excited about this myth? We, like Perseus, face an impossible task. How do we deal with a problem that if we really take it for what it is, or we really look at it, if we take it head on, we'll become petrified? The answer the Perseus myth reveals is brilliant. What does Perseus do? What does he do when he faces a monster? If he looks on it full on, he'll turn to stone. He doesn't look at it unfiltered. He looks at a reflection. The reflection gives him just enough information to take effective action, to do what needs to be done, but not so much information that he becomes petrified. Is this awesome or what? I'm so excited by this. This myth transforms the question. It's not, should we look at truth unvarnished, which is the moth, or should we hide from the horrible truth, the ostrich? Instead, the question becomes, how much information do we need to do what needs to be done while maintaining our emotional ability to carry out that task? Boom. The question then is, what is your reflective shield that shields you from paralysis, yet gives you the information you need to function in the world and take decisive action? I don't expect you to have one specific answer to this question. Questions can be more important than answers. A good question can set the parameters, frame a healthier range of actions while ruling out others. With a good question in mind, we can live out our answer. Each day is a little different, but each day is an attempt to answer that question. When my kids were young, I had a question like this. My question was, how can I build a successful business as a psychotherapist and be a good father and husband? There's no simple answer to this question, but it's a good question because it honors three competing centers for my attention. If my question had been, how do I build a successful business? Then my toddler's cute but incessant interruptions would bring aggravation. They would be distraction from my task. Or if my question had been, how do I be a good parent? Then clients emailing me on the weekends to schedule a session would have felt like a burden. But with a proper question, I was able to navigate the challenge of starting a family while at the same time starting up a business. Some days were certainly better than others. Some days were a disaster. Sometimes I pitched between one pole or the other, but the question kept me coming back to an equilibrium, a balance. That is what I want for you with this question. I want you to ask yourself, what do I need to know in order to take effective action in the world? All right, so that's the main thing I want you to get from this myth. What do I need to know in order to take effective action in the world? But there's more here too. The Perseus myth not only helps us come up with this question, but the shield metaphor has other implications as well. The reflective surface softens the horror, it weakens it, dilutes it, and makes it more tolerable and places it within a context. A reflective shield in this case could be philosophy, spirituality, religion, literature, folk tales, and myths. One of the reasons why I've turned to folk tales and myths is because we are dealing with some very dark, disturbing content. Myths and stories put a frame around a horrible truth and place it within a meaningful context. With such a framing, a previously toxic truth is transformed into something that gives you a purpose or makes your life more precious or more worth living. The same is true of great art, music, literature. One example is George Orwell's 1984, which can be a real help in times like this. 1984 is a helpful way to acknowledge, while at the same time limiting the psychological damage of doublespeak, which we are currently experiencing. We don't need to waste valuable emotional or intellectual energy trying to figure out what's going on. With the framework of 1984, we know what censorship in the name of free speech is all about. But there's even more we can learn from this myth. Did Perseus act alone? Not at all. He had help from multiple gods who bestowed on him many gifts. He could not have successfully completed his quest without their help. If we look at this from a Jungian perspective, or from the perspective of a Joseph Campbell, Perseus represents your ego, your conscious self, the part of you that says, I. But Perseus gets help from the gods. From a Jungian perspective, the gods represent various aspects of your subconscious, your deeper self, your larger self, the self with a capital S. I was listening to this Jungian Life podcast, and the episode was how to develop your inner guidance. And they were talking about how when you're following your purpose, when you are doing what is in alignment with your deeper self, you know because you suddenly have access to all sorts of vital energy. You have a certain vitality, a certain life. I feel that with this podcast. I'm doing this podcast on top of seeing clients, running a counseling center, being a husband and a father. But resilience in dark times gives me energy. It's not a chore, it's a labor of love. When we are doing what we should be doing, when we are in alignment with our purpose, we receive help from unseen sources, gifts and energy from our subconscious mind. In previous episodes, you may have been asking yourself, what the heck is the benefit of walking this path? We're walking into horror, adversity, ugliness. Well, this is the benefit. When you confront reality and live in alignment with your purpose, you live deeply, fully. You feel fully alive. The people who always use the ostrich strategy, those who never confront difficult truths, miss out on life. Their gifts are undiscovered and so unused. It's interesting that Perseus gets these gifts as he's preparing to do this terrible, impossible task. That's how this works. If you just hide from life, if you hide from the truth, if you hide from reality, the world never benefits from your unique presence. What is the difference between Blake and the Lovecraft story and Perseus? Blake acted alone, and maybe even against the warning signs of his subconscious, namely the foreshadowing of his own death. Blake, as ego, desired arcane secrets of the universe for his own purposes. And it was too much for him. He was fried. That power fried his small self. But Perseus acted in accord with the heavens and not for himself. Perseus, as ego, was in service. He was in alignment with his deeper purpose. He was on a quest. Because of this, he was able to draw from powers deep within himself in the form of gifts from the gods. As I mentioned in the first episode, I'm not going to tell you what to think. I'm not going to tell you how to feel. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I want to help you think and feel through different possibilities and to be able to assess various strengths and weaknesses and various options. What I'm concerned about is you getting locked into one extreme or the other. To simply open yourself up to all the suffering and trauma of the world can flood your nervous system and cause you to burn out or to shut down. If you hide from all the facts of what is happening in the world, that prevents you from taking effective action to mitigate any potential negative consequences. Rigidity is weak. Rigidity shatters. Fluidity and flexibility is adaptive. With each breath, our heart rate fluctuates, adapting to each moment as it comes. One predictor of an oncoming heart attack is a rigid, unchanging heartbeat. Heart rate variability is key. Systems become rigid before they collapse. I'm hoping that when you are taking in difficult information, you are tracking the impact it is having on you. I'm hoping that you're acquiring enough information to make you an effective actor in the world, but not too much information that you are emotionally incapacitated. And yes, sometimes a little denial is adaptive. I'm hoping that you wisely choose a reflective shield that serves you well. Just a couple notes before we wrap up. Moths are not compelled to fly into the light. It turns out that they use the brightest light source to orient at night. The moths assume that the brightest source of light is the sky, which makes sense. So they turn so that the source of light is above them. This causes them to turn sideways or upside down when there's an artificial light source, which causes them to spiral into the light source itself. You can read more about this in the show notes. Again, turn off lights at night if they're not needed, or use yellow bug lights. As for ostriches, they don't hide their heads in the sand or in the bushes. They can actually run from a predator at 40 miles an hour. They are the fastest birds on land. Also, when a predator is near their nest, they will go away from the nest, lie on the ground, and flap their wings to draw attention away from their eggs. And when confronted, ostriches can kill a lion with one kick. Wow. I have a new respect for ostriches. And finally, in working on this episode, I thought of one more path in dealing with the unbearable truth, and that is the path of the mystic. This is a dangerous path, and it is above my pay grade, but what I'm thinking of here is the path of the saints, the path of enlightenment. It's a transformation on a very deep, profound level. I think this is the secret desire of Blake, the real quest of the moth, to be transformed into a type of being who can handle unvarnished truth. On a personal level, psychologically, I have experienced transformation. And I help people in my practice undergo these transformations psychologically as well. But what we're talking about here is something that's more spiritual and a mystical awakening. I feel like at some point we need to talk about that and deal with that. And so we will get into that in a later episode. In the meantime, your action item, I want you to feel into and think about, what is your reflective shield? What filter do you use to help you deal with the horrible truth? And then when you check in with your apocalypse buddy, I haven't come up with a better name yet, ask them how they psychologically protect themselves while at the same time getting enough information to take effective action. What are the stories, philosophies, or political frameworks that help them deal with the horrible truth of this moment and empower resilient action? If neither of you have anything, that's okay. Just talk about what that would look like. What would you need to have that? And then where you might find your shield. I think your answers will surprise you. Next episode, we will look at fear, how to make a friend of fear. Most of us don't like to feel anxious or to feel afraid, but you don't need to be afraid of fear. Fear can be a valuable friend, and I'll show you how. All right, until next time, be a feisty ostrich. That's all for this episode of Resilience in Dark Times. Your action items? First, try one strategy we discussed. Second, connect with one person about these issues. Breaking isolation is resistance. And third, leave us a review to help others find this community. For show notes and resources, visit resilienceindarktimes.com. I'm Michael Glavin, reminding you that your resilience is revolutionary. See you next episode.